Good morning to all our distinguished guests and scholars who have joined us this morning. My name is Disetso Kwanda. I am a politics honors student here at Rhodes University, and I am also a student leader in the Rhodes University Community Engagement Division. And my task today is the great honor of introducing the very first keynote speaker of our conference. Our keynote speaker for today is a former visiting professor at the Center of Race, Education, and Decoloniality at Carnegie School of Education in the UK's Leeds Beckett University. He was also the 2018 Marsha Lillian Gladstein Visiting Professor of Human Rights at the University of Connecticut. He has served as a Director and Deputy Chief Executive Officer of the South African Human Rights Commission and on the Commission for Gender Equality before joining the university sector. Since entering the higher education field, he has held professorial positions at the universities of Pretoria, Fort Hare, and Free State, and has worked as a transformation advisor and practitioner in various capacities in the sector. His university work seeks to merge practical experience and experiments with the vocation of scholarship, executive management, and strategic leadership. Working relationally in managing complex and dynamic work spheres and networks, he pursues the interplay between friendship, politics, love, and justness to guide his praxis on higher education transformation, democracy, and human rights education, decentered critical university studies, and the nexus between university, science, and society. Serving as the Research Chair of Critical Studies in Higher Education Transformation, please help me to extend a very warm welcome to today's keynote speaker, the Deputy Vice-Chancellor of Nelson Mandela University for Engagement and Transformation, Professor Andre Keet.
The public debate over the nature of universities, so scholars claim, is imaginatively stunted. There is a thinness, so they say, in our contemporary thinking about the university. The imaginary landscape of the idea of higher education is rather empty. Imaginative ideas of the university are in short supply. Then there are others who say that the university is a criminal, key in an emerging form of global racial capitalism, rather than an innocent institution for the common good. As a criminal, neoliberal, and neo-colonial institution, the university should be abolished and reinvented, plastically exploded, annihilated, as the Undercommoning Collective is arguing for. As such, we should refuse the university. The university's criminality is derived from two sources. First, it functions within the broader matrix of socio-economic exploitation, steered by its attachment to a modern colonial imaginary. Second, the practices ensuing from this imaginary undercut the transformative capacity of the university, thereby eroding its social justice capabilities. On top of this, the university is also a corrupt institution, from its foundations built on slavery in North America and elsewhere, and rooted in the racist sciences of Europe to modern-day cultures of fraud, perversion, and predation in South Africa and beyond. In this, we are all entangled. No one is innocent. But the university is also inherently transformative, as are the academics, staff, and students within it, and the communities in whose name it exists. And because of this capacity, the university can be remarkably responsive if it chooses to do so. It is on this interplay between responsiveness and transformation that my talk is focusing, with reference to engagement, epistemic freedom, and institutional culture. Friends and friends, conveners and colleagues from within and beyond the Academy, and the great organizers of this event, many thanks to Dai and Margie for this generous invitation to this conference, no doubt the premier gathering on university engagement in South Africa. The program, wide in range, substantive, in depth, is a feast. Thanks to the Rhodes University executive team and others for supporting this conference, as well as the organizing teams involved in various aspects of the events. The welcoming remarks by the DVC was just brilliant and heartwarming. It sets the platform for great discussions to emerge from this gathering. Let me also extend our appreciation as a sector to Rhodes University and its communities for the leading role it plays in the engagement arena and for advancing the scholarship of engagement. We are certainly richer because of this work. Many thanks to all of you who have taken the time to attend as well. Of course, our own university's philosophy and work on engagement under the leadership of Bruce Darmons has also generated energetic interest in the sector as well. Work done by many universities present here across the system also suggests a new spirit of engagement. So I am delighted to present to you today within the context of this new spirit and energy. This address is based on a chapter that Mutwa and I put together, as well as some of the observations I made at the Tau conference last year. In addition, I am drawing on my current work on racism's knowledge, i.e. that knowledge belongs to racism, as well as on some work on epistemic othering, work that I have done in 2014. I also work with a number of young people in these fields, Klangi, Luan, Jenny, Daniela, Nobu, and others. Their work at insight and informal engagements are spread across this talk, so it does not belong to me, myself. For this particular theme, Mutwa and I suggest an interplay between engagement and transformation as a proposition and provocation that attempts to disclose that which, for the most part, goes unthought of in our sector. That is, real, authentic transformation and engagement presuppose the puncturing of the standard and conventional character and orientation of the university, for which we are yet to imagine alternative options. On this basis, we can envision a university whose structures and agents are both outwardly and inwardly engaged, a university that draws from its strong community, university, society interface for resources through which it can advance its institutional transformation project. Thus, for us, engagement and transformation co-constitute each other. This is not the standard way, as the DVC said, of imagining the university or the institutions in our sector, though it was intimated more than 2 decades ago in the work of the Council on Higher Education already. So the interplay between engagement and transformation is not a new proposition. It just never ever took shape in the way that we thought it should. Rather, Immersed in the over-proximity of engagement, transformation, decolonization, and social justice rhetoric within and outside our universities, higher education actors and the academy are misreading the task at hand as simply extending and endorsing the contemporary emerging forms of the university and higher education systems. That is, we argue that the same university should simply be better and bigger. It should be agile and flexible, but it should be similar to its old structures and forms. And this is perhaps the first set of mistakes. That is, we think of the same university to be more engaged, not of an engaged university as a different institutional form with a distinct institutional character. Why is this the case? Because, as Sharon Stein argues, we are invested in the privileges of the university in its current form, which organizes not only our ideas and institutions, but also our desires and our perceived entitlements, often in ways that are unconscious to ourselves. In line with this argument, the literature on engagement in South Africa itself hardly ever suggests shifts in the character and orientation of the university and its academy, because our imaginary is steered by an enduring investment in a colonial habit of being within the university. And herein lies the reproductive and seductive power of institutions by which we are structured. But even as we are structured, we have the agency to work against our own structuration. For this reason, we thought of offering the engagement transformation interface conceived in the form of the transformative responsive university as a feasible and doable option for reimagining the university in new ways and by which its dominant character can be questioned. In this, we argue in the direction of emancipatory articulations of epistemic freedom, engagement work, and institutional cultures. Given the interest of this conference theme in the evolving idea of engagement, it may be useful to make a few historical remarks in this regard. This was also done by the DVC in her welcoming remarks. The notion of transformation that emerged during the first decade after apartheid was shaped by the double challenge of our higher education system, the country's apartheid legacy, and then, of course, the processes of globalization that engulfed the world from the 1990s onwards. We suggest that a three-tier conception of transformation has since developed within the sector. 1, large-scale reconfiguration of the system. 2, responses to global and local processes and influences. And 3, social justice and human rights programming. The first tier relates to the post-1994 focus of the South African state on policy constructions to pave the way for the restructuring and development of society in order to deal with the multifaceted and depraved inheritance from the apartheid era. Such all-encompassing processes and interventions touch the entirety of the public sector machinery, from the hospital and the prison sector, but also the private sector during the first decade of democracy. The second tier relates to the global forces at play that have had a direct impact on higher education, change and transformation, massification, internationalization, globalization, advances in information and communications technology, together with the macro funding challenges of the sector, are some examples. Whereas the first tier is organized around the principles of equity, redress, quality, access, and democratization within the context of a new social order, post-1994, the second tier is associated with steering global, regional, and local forces within which the system is entangled. The principles and concepts of the first two tiers thus addresses themselves to systemic changes within a sector influenced by global forces in the aftermath of apartheid. The third tier, which is our weakest, mobilizes the language of human rights, non-discrimination, equality, cultural tolerance, and a common commitment to a humane, non-racist, and non-sexist social order. This angle relates to how the institutional culture, programmatic, relational, pedagogical, and knowledge endeavors of the university may facilitate transformation processes within and outside the university. This tier, which is linked to the orientation and character of the university, has hardly been a focus in ways that are directly transformative. Similarly, the notion of engagement, and in particular community engagement, is a topic well traversed in the South African higher education literature. It is an overarching phrase used to denote a range of frameworks of praxis at the community society university nexus. Given the wide-ranging typology of these practices, there is general agreement for an inclusive classification of engagement activities and orientations, from scientific innovations, knowledge transfers, and socio-economic development, to advancing social and solidarity economies across a range of contexts. These may, in a variety of ways, align with the triple helix model, university, business, government, the added fourth helix, media and culture-based publics, or the enlarged fifth helix, society and the natural environment. Bree suggests that the academic literature on community engagement, and this she wrote in 2017, stretches barely back more than 20 years. And that over this period, a conceptual movement and shift, also noted in the welcoming remarks, from service to the community to engage scholarship took place as an integral part of teaching, research, and knowledge production. That particular axiom is well established within the work that we are doing as engagement practitioners. The notion of scholarship of engagement represents for Preece one of two dominant definitional frameworks. So you have three tiers for transformation and three definitional frameworks for engagement that I am trying to bring together here. The second tier that she refers to is linked to the Carnegie Foundation, which introduced the term engagement as a substitute for the now less popular notion of service and outreach, and defined engagement as university community collaboration for the mutually beneficial exchange of knowledge and resources in the context of partnerships and reciprocity. Also a notion that is well accepted within our spaces. The third, not so dominant. So you have the third tier of transformation, not so dominant in our space. Now you have the third definitional framework of engagement, not so dominant. So you have two Cinderella conceptions coming together here. The third, not so dominant definitional framework, according to Preece, endeavors to position the community-university relationship as a direct and ethical contribution to knowledge creation within a social justice framework. Here, according to Hall and Tandon, which is also authors and practitioners use within the Roos space as well, the idea of knowledge democracy can be located based on three principles. Acceptance of multiple epistemologies, affirmation that knowledge is created and represented in multiple forms, and understanding that knowledge is a tool for taking action to create a more socially just and healthy world, and for deepening democracy. Now you can see how these third conceptions with regard to transformation and engagement are coming together in our imagination of the responsive transformative university. But despite these conceptual movements within and around the notion of engagement, Preece argues that the dominant form of engagement is the one that is discursively, conceptually, and pragmatically trapped within an orientation of charitability and philanthropy. The circular meanings now for both transformation and engagement are thus apparent, I hope. That is, despite critical work in these areas, our own literature and assessment of programmatic work suggests that we struggle to escape an equity compliance notion of transformation on the one hand and a charitable messianic notion of engagement on the other. No doubt, there are many examples, and the program shows this, across the sector that break free from these conceptions, which is a great source of energy for the work that we do. The notion of engagement adopted by a university has, if this logic is followed, a profound impact on its character and thus its institutional culture and vice versa. That is, an equalizing openness to an other outside will most definitely contribute to an openness to an other inside, thus changing the relatively enduring quality of the organization which is experienced by its members as institutional culture. Thereby, of course, the interplay between engagement and institutional culture is being argued for here. There is thus a real possibility that the deeply embedded patterns of organizational behavior as a definitional framework of institutional culture and the shared values, assumptions, beliefs, or ideologies that members have about the organization may shift in alignment with the university's ideals and ambition for engagement. Now just think of it like this. If you have the three major mandates of the university, and learning and teaching didn't do this for you, neither did research, innovation, and internationalization, shouldn't we then rely on a massive investment in engagement to allow us the opportunities for transformation within this sector to emerge much more stronger and, of course, also to change our institutional cultures as well? So if we accept this logic, then the well-established idea of knowledge democracy within the engagement work and literature does not only have transformative potential for the university in the direction of social justice, which we are all striving for, but also for the university's culture itself. So knowledge, democracy, and epistemic freedom share conceptual coordinates. They have a theoretical kinship as notions that we deploy from time to time. Because of this theoretical and conceptual kinship, it is impossible for an ambition and drive for epistemic freedom not to impact institutional culture and not to impact the engagement orientation of the university. Now, this notion of epistemic freedom has been around for a long time, and some trace it back to the work of Hegel in the 1800s. But recently, of course, Ndlovu Kacheni published a book that positions it as contra-hegemony, the freedom to think the world outside the singular as imposed from the European metropole. Epistemic freedom, thus, is essential for questioning and challenging colonial narratives, ideologies, and systems of knowledge that have historically marginalized and oppressed certain groups. By promoting this type of freedom, the project of decolonization seeks to empower individuals to reclaim their narratives and histories and ways of knowing, thereby challenging and transforming dominant colonial paradigms. Here again, knowledge democracy, epistemic freedom connect with one another, and via various kinds of conceptual acrobatics, connect with the project of decolonization as well. If you want to take it further, of course, to the deeper project of engagement within our universities. So in essence, if epistemic freedom is a fundamental aspect of decolonization and engagement practices are rooted in knowledge democracy, then engagement practices has a decolonization responsibility to fulfill as well in the way in which some of our work then unfolds. But this particular decolonization demands, in a Derridian sense, a form of knowledge hospitality, specifically unconditional hospitality, open to a knowledge that you do not yet know. So there is no judgment to a knowledge that may approach you. So this particular formulation of knowledge is open to advance various kinds of knowledges that are not disciplined within the university space as such. And this is the kind of knowledge democracy that colleagues within the engagement space are talking about. But epistemic freedom is also much more than academic freedom or the freedom to do as you like, but rather an injunction on the academic to actively emancipate knowledge and knowledge holders unconditionally. Okay? Knowledge and knowledge holders. Just think of those communities in whose name we do the engagement work. And this is the key task of the engaged university of the future. A gathering like this will need to advance these tasks, as we move ahead. But there are also wide-ranging conceptions of and ideas about the university if, we just go back to my opening remarks. Now, amongst more than 20 different conceptions, from the entrepreneurial university to the developmental university, I would like to limit myself for the purposes of this particular keynote to the engaged university that envisions an equal exchange between academy and community, which is rooted in a mutually supportive partnership, the civic university that is actively engaged with the wider world as well as its local community, and of course drive at participation, and the responsive university, which is attuned to societal needs as formulated by communities themselves. And that is just another type of definition of epistemic freedom or epistemic emancipation. But also the literature suggests 6 genres of responsiveness employed by university, and this list is by no means exhaustive. But I'm only going to mention 2. The one is social responsiveness, which ties into the idea of the responsive transformative university, which is a broad conception and application of the notion of the social, including the idea of corporate social responsibility on the one hand and social justice on the other hand. Sometimes the two work together, sometimes they are divorced. Second one is epistemic responsiveness, tied to curriculum renewal, knowledge production, and broader knowledge trends, which of course is one of the key focus areas in spaces within which we work. Reflections on these conceptions of the university, its responsibilities and genres of responsiveness suggest a growing thoughtfulness about the society, university, community nexus. So I do think that the field has come a long way. There is a sophisticated, growing thoughtfulness about this particular nexus, which we will have to write up in one way or the other, because our sector has come a long way as far as the community engagement conceptions and practical expressions of it are concerned. So there has been great shifts, over the past 3 decades. For those of you who have been working within the engagement field for years, you will know that. There's a different spirit, there's a different energy, there's a different conception, different practices emerging. And if we regard responsiveness as that which responds to the needs of communities as articulated by themselves and co-constructed by and within universities, the ability to hear, and hear metaphorically speaking, to hear these articulations, to hear when an epistemic foreigner speaks, requires deep institutional transformation. It's not if they have not been speaking. It is the incapacity of the university to hear the voices that was the challenge, okay? Now we have to get better at that. And getting better at that is the work of transformation. Hence the responsive transformative university. Yet we may need a different vantage point from which to imagine this new type of university, because if we simply reimagine higher education from where we currently stand, we will likely continue to imagine and create more of the same, as Sharon Stein has argued. So to imagine would require to enter a different platform for thinking. And so her intervention, so she says, is oriented by the imperative to denaturalize the epistemological and ontological categories and assemblages that enable higher education as we know it to exist and persist. If we fail to identify and unravel these assemblages, which include ourselves as an assemblage, the academics, practitioners ourselves, if we fail to unravel these assemblages so that we can see ourselves a bit more clearly, then it will be difficult to create an old space for other possibilities to not only emerge, but also thrive. And this particular challenge around knowledge democracies, does not simply refer to the projects around IKS, but also the different forms of survivalist knowledges that people generate, even epistemologies of oppression, epistemologies of suffering, by which people make sense of their lives, that have different epistemic contours than the professional knowledges that we are used to. But because of the hegemonic higher education field imaginary, it delineates our interpretive analytical schemes to assign particular notions to engagement and transformation, and these are generally expressed within a matrix that confers legitimacy on our common practices and pursuits and embed them in a normative scheme. Just how difficult it was, for instance, to break free of the normative schema of engagement, over the past 30 years was one example. In the case of engagement and transformation, such a matrix has constructed and entrenched conservative ideas and located them within a normative scheme that is palatable to the system and our individual selves. We can live with it because we have made it palatable to ourselves. And that is a benevolent, charitable empowerment conception, the empowerment of an other, conception of engagement, and an access, equity, compliance-driven understanding of transformation became justified, rationalized, and normalized, and are thus falsely presented as being progressive from a social justice vantage point. You can look at any of our universities' annual reports. That's how we report. We report transformation from an equity, access, compliance point of view, and we report on engagement from a benevolent, charitable empowerment point of view. This imaginary is made up of the collective norms and working assumptions and self-understandings that we have as practitioners that serve the reproduction of the system. And this happens not because we are bad people, because we are willfully malevolent, or because we're trying to do things that we should not do, but because our imaginations are locked in certain ways of thinking the task of the university. It is very, very difficult to think the university otherwise. In this African context, this particular interpretive horizon is powerfully structured by racialized and heteropatriarchal polity and higher education systems. The unequal distribution of human worth linked to socioeconomic status and the neoliberal and capitalist regimes of accumulation that constitutes us and thus the university as such. Thinking about and promoting the notion of the responsive, transformative university can, I argue, mitigate the challenges of a dwindling public legitimacy and trust in the sector. It can also be a mechanism by which we may rethink the character and orientation of the university. And there are 4 organizing principles that Mutu and I suggest for this. The one is, it is better to acknowledge that we are steered by a modern imaginary with different sets of sensibilities, in the main, middle-class sensibilities, steering the way in which we make life within the university. Just acknowledge that. And then from there, of course, determines how the meanings of transformation, engagement, equity, equality, excellence, development, good governance, success, and access, how they are then constructed by this particular imaginary, because then one can more or less see whether there are connection points or contestations amongst our self-understanding and the kinds of objectives that we are trying to pursue. Because these notions, they do not occur as an objective matrix of intelligibility, no? But as an ideological fabric that determines the meanings of the concepts that continue to serve the ongoing reproduction of the system. The concept of excellence is a very good example. So is the concept of rankings. Thanks for Rhodes, of course, for having such a great stance against that. Second, to challenge this imaginary is to unravel the assemblages of which I speak earlier, which of course presupposes undoing the practitioner self. The engagement practitioner needs to be undone, and so the academic practitioner as well. It is very strange for the academy and for academic practitioners to want to undo everything else except the self, which of course is part of the reproductive machinery of the university itself. Because it is by challenging ourselves, of course, whereby the transformative capabilities of the university can be enhanced. But in that, of course, we will have to work also on the psycho-affective dimensions of radical change within universities that constrain the emergence of this type of university that we have in mind. Third, the new university should be rooted in an interrogative self-reflexivity. And through that, of course, explore how we may position the university as poros. It's another form of arguing for epistemic freedom, which is also drawn from the work of priests. So instead of being ivory towers for community engagement, how can the university reconfigure its idea of borders and boundaries to connect better with the communities and the society in whose name it exists, of course? And it's not detached from critical inquiry, of course, because we also have to be critical of that kind of work as well. But it requires ways for the university and community to gain new understandings in a reciprocal relationship of what change may mean and how the university can exist as a citizen in a neighborly fashion with the communities in the context of the nexus that has brought us together here as at this conference. To regard the university work as porous is to work towards a university without boundaries. And this process of working without boundaries will then provide for the conditions of the co-creation of knowledge, because the knowledge requires pathways for entering the university without being professionalized or without being disciplined, because the act of disciplining itself is an ideological function. And so that when we say intellectually porous university, it also allows us for the co-construction of those knowledges that are not part of our imagination of the university. The notion of interrogating self-reflexivity in writing and literature, which I take from Epper and Jenkins, propose a way of developing a critical ontology of the academy. First act of critique is a critique of the self as a prerequisite for establishing the porous, responsive academic, and through that, of course, work towards the porous, transformative university. This reflexivity focuses on how we impose meanings in this instance on communities. How do we impose meanings on communities, and the ways in which we fail in our impositions. And because we can't read the failure, we find it very difficult to avoid ontological violence in our engagement with communities. And so we should pay attention to the dangers to trespass, to moments when one threatens to violate the sacredness of an other's existence, or threatens to identify with another's experiences and claim it as one's own. Okay, those are the dangers, which is very, very difficult to be attuned to, because in the academy we do not have a deep form of reflexivity. So these kinds of reflexivities is not only set aside for the project of engagement, but also for the project of transformation. And so the fourth principle, which is related to interrogative self-reflexivity, is the precondition for change, and that is critical self-knowledge at an individual and institutional level. A self-knowledge that can guide us through imagining a new university. I find it very interesting, and the literature is full of it. That is, universities actually are not very good at knowing themselves. Neither are academics very good at deconstructing what it is that they're actually doing. Of course, what they claim they do and how they claim they look and what they actually do are two different things as well. And this is where one of the key work of community engagement needs to come in, is to build that kind of humility that's required for a form of self-reflexivity, build a different type of university. So as I move towards conclusion, the UNESCO Chair and Partners Forum will later this year in Addis Ababa host a seminar on transforming knowledge and argues that knowledge is key to radically changing course towards a more just and sustainable future, because knowledge is that what gives meaning to the world around us, shapes our understandings, and guides our actions. Okay, right? That is settled, we know that. Yet, so it further argues, dominant models, our existing models of knowledge generation, so it's now about models of knowledge generation and knowledge validation and knowledge distribution, and ultimately the use of knowledge can no longer respond effectively to the intersecting multidimensional crisis we face today. If it could, we would have been in a different space, planetary and otherwise. So there is something wrong with knowledge production, knowledge validation, and the distribution of knowledge and use. So we require different ways of thinking through the transformative response of university, how these different transformative aspects of knowledge itself can come into being. Additionally, there's a need for the reformulation. This is the task that we have at hand in this conference, Dai and colleagues, is the reformulation of the public dimension of knowledge and innovation, particularly its implications for education and development on our continent. So for us, as engagement practitioners in the knowledge business, the task of reinventing knowledge is crucial, linked to the knowledge, democracy, and epistemic freedom that we spoke about earlier. Where else, if not in our work, will these tasks be undertaken? In the working paper of the forum, Mbembe calls for the acceleration of a new planetary consciousness that recognizes the interdependent relationships that human beings have with the environment, the need to combat racism, and draws on all our archives of the world, including African systems of thought. This redefinition of the world that is presupposed by a redefinition of the university, and of course by a new planetary consciousness, is dependent on the type of community, university, society, relationship we are capable of imagining. The concept note for the conference is spot on, I think, in arguing for critical reflections in relating current experiences to prior knowledge, perceptions, and historical events, and the fact that knowledge will have a significant impact on future possibilities for community engagement, specifically with regard to epistemic justice, social justice, and the cultivation of humanity in South Africa and the rest of our continent, to paraphrase the conference concept note. We thus have a very special ethical responsibility, I think. So not only are we called upon to work with a disciplined knowledge by which communities are generally framed in the negative, that is the ideological function of disciplining knowledge, and that is to create an other outside of that disciplining process, generally in the negative. But we also have to work with our collaborators to fight for the epistemic status of different forms of community knowledges. In the 2014 paper, Epistemic Andering, I propose to view the decolonization of knowledge as the collective processes by which disciplinary practices are successful in working against the inscribed epistemic injustices of all knowledge formations. And we have to accept that all knowledge formations, no knowledge is innocent. No knowledge formation is innocent. All knowledge formations requires a critical eye. Even those that we will drive from the archive, of millennia ago. All knowledge formations have different forms of justices and injustices inscribed in them, okay? So the notion of incompleteness for me is very crucial here. So following Bataille, I believe that at the limits of reflection, the value of knowledge, it seems, depends on its ability to make any conclusive image of the universe impossible. The value of knowledge depends on its ability to make any conclusive image about what we do impossible. That is the task of learning, the task of the discipline, the task of our work is to reveal in the way that we work how incomplete we are, how incomplete our knowledges are, and how incomplete it will remain. It is in the incompleteness of knowledge and the subject that the possibility thrives in incompleteness. It is our responsibility to remember that it was the complete subject. And here I quote Liz Lange when she argues in a review of intellectual traditions in South Africa, ideas, individuals, and institutions, to turn the lens of critique onto ourselves, our practice, a speculative idea who can shift and change as we debate and as we discuss it. But we believe at the present moment, in terms of our own speculative analysis, that at the interface of the responsive, transformative university lies the, what one can say, the fertile options for reimagining the university anew. I wish Rhodes University a happy 120th anniversary. Please enjoy this wonderful event and gathering. Many thanks for listening. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof. Keet. And I think just reflecting on both what you and Madam DVC were talking about, both of you actually emphasized responsiveness. And as both of you were talking, it made me think of, and people that know me know I always say this over and over again, but Prof. Chris Brink, a South African mathematician and academic, he wrote a book called The Soul of the University. And in that book he says universities have to ask themselves two questions. The first is, what are we good at? So at Rhodes, as a research-intensive university, obviously we're very good at research and publications. But he's saying the main question to be asked is, what are we good for? So yes, we the best when it comes to publications and research. But how does that bring about change, or how is it responsive to societal challenges? So both of you really emphasize that. And Prof. Keet, I never thought of knowledge hospitality. So you've also taught me something new now. That's very interesting. And thank you for sharing your thoughts on a new spirit and energy of engagement. We still have time left, so we'll open the floor for 3 questions, and we'll see if there are time after that. So 3 questions. Can we just by hands? We have a roaming mic. Questions, thoughts? Yes, thanks, Kathy. 1, any other questions? There's 2 there, and a 3rd one. Okay, we'll go with the 2 so long.
Prof. Keet, thank you very much for a very insightful and thought-provoking presentation. I was just wondering, in terms of not just how the university itself, imagines itself, but perceptions from outside. about university and from society and communities about what universities are and should be and their role. Is there an influence there? Is there a rethinking that possibly needs to happen outside of the university itself about what a university is and should be?
Okay. Okay, thank you. It's not on. Is it on? Okay. Thank you very much, Prof, for that insightful presentation. If you don't mind, I'd like you to elaborate on the criminality of universities, especially post fees must fall. And then any ideas of the whole notion of the critique of self, you know, how as academic we can engage on this path of really critiquing self, because I think that's where it starts. It's so easily to be, like, to go with the flow, but I think for me, the core of what we do on a daily basis is the constant critiquing of self. If we can elaborate on those two, thank you.
Morning. My question to Prof. Keet is how do we possible decolonize a university? Because a university, we must understand it as a migrated social racist structure that doesn't belong in Africa. So then where do we start? How do we decolonize something that doesn't belong to us, doesn't represent us, is not symbolic in nature, in form, in character of us as Africans? And secondary to this question, I want to understand as well, with the view that social sciences itself is imperialism, it's conquest. So how can we then decolonize even those things without taking them back where they come from and try to reconstruct them in our own views? Because now we are just going with what we are given without creating what we can and what we want, what is symbolic and looks like us. Thanks.
Thanks so much. Of course, very challenging interventions. So I'll chat, and then, of course, it's not going to be answers, but I'll share what I read the questions to put on the table. Yeah, in fact, The Soul of the University, the chapter I was referring to was published in the follow-up book of Chris Brink, actually. So that's a very good connection that you made there, Doc. And then yes, of course, the first speaker. I think that the university, in the way it's being perceived as a university, is something that we will have to defend once we have established what this particular new orientation of the university would be. And I do think that there are some, what one can say, characteristics of the university, like, for instance, being a social critic and a social conscience of society is like the broader acceptable idea of what a university should be, and that should be defended. I think that the university, that's probably globally, the university sector is one of the most stable social sectors in many societies, even including in the South African society, in many parts of our continent as well, and even in the global north as well. Very, very important ecosystem of social institutions, which, of course, without which the society won't be able to survive. So very important. So even when I critique the university, I critique it from that particular point of view. And so the university needs to be defended, but not defended in the context of trying to recuperate a university that was good in the past, but recuperate a university as something that must emerge from the future, okay? The better type of university that must come from the future. That's actually one of the big challenges in our field of study that we have. And that is that scholars think that there was a good university somewhere in the past, you know, in all parts of the world, that we will have to retrace to think the university anew. Our argument is that that university has never existed. That university needs to be built as we move along. But in good, I'm more or less not talking about a university that is so bad that one should, think it out of existence, but more or less the university, as Claudia would say, the university that can manage its own criminality a bit better. No? So, and universities are very, very poor at that, at identifying its own complicity in the challenges that the world is facing. Planetary challenges is one of those. No? Many of these developments came through different sets of knowledge innovations, the interfaces with the industrial military complex, if you look at the universities in the global north, the various ways in which universities has, of course, advanced not only racist science, but racist ideologies within knowledge formations and all those. No? So there's massive criminalities within the university edifice. No? But, as our Department of Corrections will say, the university can be retrieved from that form of criminality as well. So the university in the post-fees era, in the context of, perhaps, Claudia, you say perhaps the promises that it couldn't deliver on with regard to what that era bring to us, there is a different set of complex relationships that are emerging there as well. So we will have to think the university, and this is where I think that the new era of thinking the university is going to come from its third mandate. Both in terms of its public legitimacy, but also in the way in which it can retune the idea of learning, teaching, and knowledge generation as well. It will come from its third mandate. Many of you would know that I also regard transformation as the fourth silent mandate of the university in any case. So that's where that work will come from. There are some examples actually, in the literature that supports this particular speculation. The critique of self is very, very crucial. I do think that the academy does not have a critical ontology of itself. We have not been used to, because everything else was up for critique for the academy, except the academy itself. No? So critique was something that we do to other things. And so the self-critique of the academy, that is why the claims that universities make about themselves are so far removed from what is actually happening. And the way sometimes academics speaks about themselves and what they think they are doing is actually very distant from the reality, as to what is at play. That's where that peculiar, what one can say, competency of having one sense of oneself very close to social reality is not something that we are actually very good at. I count myself in that, okay? So I'm not here as a kind of a moral agent speaking down to people. That's how the academy has been grown up to be. The Knowledge Project, this is the strange thing about the Knowledge Project. The Knowledge Project is meant to generate humility, but it does exactly the opposite. Why? It's a very, very strange thing within the university sector. The decolonizing the university, impossible. No? We must just settle our minds on that. To decolonize the university is impossible. No? It is an institution that is so steeply rooted in a colonial imaginary that to decolonize the university as an institution is an impossibility. To do good decolonization work in the university, that's a big possibility. Okay? And there's a difference between the two. Okay? To do good decolonization work within the university is a great possibility. But to think of the university as an institution decolonized in all those respects is impossible. But there's also another way of thinking the university, and that is to think the university in a multiplicity of institutions within one. You can have a conventional university at Rhodes, and you can have a decolonizing university at the same university. You can have a conventional university at Nelson Mandela University, and then you can have a radical form of it at the same university as well. So that's, universities are actually multiplicities of universities within the same structure, okay? And you can have all different types of universities within that particular structure. You don't have to choose, which one becomes the area of work that you think should designate the university as such. I think that good universities allows for work against themselves in the context of being a social critic and conscience of society. Good universities are universities that are not afraid to fund people that think upstream from themselves or in different directions. And that's actually good universities. Good universities are universities that will fund radical decolonization work within the university space itself, even if it tries to protect a different type of university. And then with regard to the social sciences, this is the unfortunate thing, is that in the South African context, if I just think of sociology, for instance, we have great colleagues at our university that have rethought so many African concepts that you can literally speak about a black sociology. If you just think about bringing that work together. So there is a way in which one can retune the social sciences. I think that we are not good at putting those handbooks together and say to ourselves, this is the work that has historically been done in the area of anthropology in South Africa, in sociology, and in history. If somebody has the time and the energy and funds for that, I think that we will be surprised by what we already have done in the spaces of the social sciences. But here again, of course, you will have different epistemes playing in there as well. Then there, in black radical tradition, there is, massive bodies of work already from plantation studies, in the way in which, the slaves generated an epistemology of oppression or epistemology of suffering, if you might call it. And there are new forms within which the epistemic imagination can be retuned through that work. Then, of course, African feminist work, new formulations, within the context of the social. So maybe we should invest our energy and time in pulling together what we have done in the space of the social sciences as well. And there's great work being done in the hard sciences as well. We have had a decolonization in Durban not so long ago, where colleagues presented the work that they've been doing. It's an eye-opener, It's really, really interesting to think how people think the Africanization, decolonization project from their own disciplinary homes and boundaries as well. So that work is possible. But the main price of a decolonized institution, I think that will be, I think that's an impossibility. Thanks.